October 3rd, 1849. Baltimore. A man is found slumped outside a tavern called Gunner's Hall, delirious, wearing clothes that don't belong to him. He's muttering about spectral visions on the walls. He has no idea how he got there. 4 days later, his final words are reportedly, "Lord, help my poor soul." And then he's gone. He was 40 years old. The man? Edgar Allan Poe? The guy who invented the detective story? The man who wrote about premature burial, beating hearts hidden under floorboards, and ravens that show up at midnight to psychologically torture you. And here's what gets me. His Capricorn Sun basically predicted all of it. The obsession with death, the melancholy, the relentless need to document darkness as if his life depended on it. But wait, until you see what his Pisces Moon was doing to his emotional world this entire time, and how one specific placement explains why every single woman he loved was destined to break his heart by leaving him the same exact way. Keep that in mind, because when we get to Virginia, it's going to hit different. If you're into understanding famous people through their charts, hit subscribe, drop a like if you're ready for this story, and I genuinely want to know, would you want Poe's chart, like the creative genius that comes with it, but also the curse of watching everyone you love die? Comment below, because I'm still processing this one myself. Okay. So, Edgar Allan Poe, born January 19, 1809 in Boston, Capricorn Sun. And not just barely a Capricorn. He was born right in the heart of Capricorn season when Saturn's influence is at full power. His moon was almost certainly in Pisces given his birth date and the emotional patterns we see throughout his life. And while we don't have his exact birth time, many astrologers speculate Scorpio Rising based on how the world perceived him: mysterious, morbid, intense, like death itself was following him around. Let me break down why this combination is basically the perfect recipe for someone who would become the father of horror literature. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, the planet of time, limitation, structure, and death. Capricorns have this unique relationship with mortality. They don't fear it the way other signs do. They study it. They become almost intimate with it. Saturn forces Capricorn to confront the reality that everything ends, and instead of running from that, Capricorns often become its chronicler, its biographer. Think about that. The sign of legacy, of building things that outlast you, combined with a fundamental awareness that nothing lasts forever. That's Poe. Now add the Pisces Moon. This is where the artistic suffering comes in. Pisces moons feel everything. They have this thin veil between their inner world and outer reality. Dreams blur into waking life. Pain becomes poetry. They absorb the emotions around them like a sponge and often struggle to separate their feelings from everyone else's. Pisces moons are natural artists because they channel the unconscious directly onto the page. But here's the shadow side. They also have a tendency toward escapism, addiction, getting lost in fantasy worlds because reality is simply too painful to bear. You see where this is going, right? Capricorn Sun documenting death with methodical precision. Pisces Moon drowning in emotional anguish and finding release through art. This is a man who was built to write about madness and grief and loss because his entire chart was living it. And that Scorpio Rising everyone suspected, it meant the world saw him exactly as his work. Dark, magnetic, touched by something otherworldly. Remember this combination because it explains literally everything that's about to happen. Now let's talk about how this chart showed up from day one. Because Poe didn't choose darkness. Darkness chose him before he could even speak. Edgar was the second of 3 children born to David and Elizabeth Poe, both traveling actors. His father abandoned the family in 1810 when Edgar was barely a year old. Classic Capricorn wound right there. The absent father, the early introduction to abandonment. But it gets worse. On December 8, 1811, his mother Elizabeth died of tuberculosis in Richmond, Virginia. Edgar was 2 years old. He watched his mother waste away from a disease that would haunt him for the rest of his life. After Elizabeth's death, the 3 Poe children were split up. His older brother Henry went to live with their grandparents in Baltimore. His baby sister Rosalie was taken in by another Richmond family. And Edgar? Edgar was taken into the home of John and Frances Allen, a wealthy merchant family. They never formally adopted him. Let that sink in. He was raised by them, given their name as his middle name, treated like a son, but never actually made one, never given the legal security of belonging. This is textbook Capricorn early trauma, the sign that craves stability, structure, legitimacy, and he got none of it. He was always in between, always almost belonging, but not quite. That wound of not truly being accepted? It shows up in his work constantly. Characters who don't fit in, outsiders, people trapped in situations they can't escape. His chart was writing his themes before he ever picked up a pen. The relationship with John Allan was complicated from the start. Frances Allan adored Edgar. She was gentle with him, nurturing. But John Allan? That's where the Capricorn father wound really deepened. Allan alternated between spoiling Edgar and aggressively disciplining him. He paid for Edgar's education, sent him to private academies, took him to England for 5 years, but there was always a coldness there, a sense that Edgar had to earn his place and was never quite measuring up. Remember this pattern with his father figure because it explains exactly why he couldn't stop sabotaging his own success later. Every mentor, every editor, every authority figure, Poe pushed them away. Classic wounded Capricorn behavior. If you've already learned that father figures will reject you, you beat them to the punch. In 1826, Edgar enrolled at the University of Virginia. He was 17. Brilliant, excelled at Latin and French. But here's where the shadow side kicks in. John Allan sent him to university with barely enough money to cover tuition. Edgar, desperate and probably a little reckless, turned to gambling to make up the difference. He racked up around $2,000 in debt. When he came home, Allan refused to pay. They had a massive falling out, and Edgar left Richmond, essentially disowned. This is the first time we see a pattern that would repeat his entire life. Poe was talented enough to succeed at almost anything he tried, but something always went wrong. Usually money, usually relationships with authority. That Capricorn-Saturn energy can manifest as incredible discipline and achievement, or as the universe constantly putting obstacles in your path. For Poe, it was both. He was destined to work harder than anyone else and still struggle. After leaving the Allan household, Edgar enlisted in the army under a fake name, Edgar A. Perry. He actually did well there, rose to the rank of sergeant major in just 2 years. But the military wasn't where he wanted to be. He wanted to write, so he got himself discharged and made his way to West Point thinking maybe a military education would appease John Allan and get him back into the family's good graces. It didn't work. While Edgar was at West Point, Allan remarried after Frances Allan's death, and the new wife made it clear Edgar was not welcome. Allan had also fathered illegitimate children, which became a source of bitter conflict between them. Edgar, realizing he was never going to get the acceptance he craved, deliberately got himself court-martialed and expelled from West Point. Classic self-sabotage. If they're going to reject me anyway, I'll do it first. After West Point, Edgar moved to Baltimore and into the home of his Aunt Maria Clem and her daughter Virginia. His grandmother lived there too. It was a crowded, impoverished household, but it was the first time since childhood that Edgar felt like he truly belonged somewhere. Maria Clem became the mother figure he'd lost at 2. She would stay by his side until the day he died. And Virginia. Virginia was 7 years old when Edgar first moved in. Remember that Pisces Moon I told you about? The one that blurs boundaries in love? Keep it in mind, because what happens next is a lot. Okay, here's where Poe's story really takes off, and where his chart's darker patterns start to crystallize into genius. In Baltimore, Edgar pivoted from poetry to short stories. He entered a writing contest in 1833 and won $50 for his story. The win got him noticed by the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond, and by 1835 he was working as their editor. This was his break, his chance to build the career he'd always wanted. But here's the thing about Capricorns. They don't just want success. They want to be recognized as the best. They want legacy. They want their name to outlast them. And Poe? Poe didn't just want to write stories. He wanted to invent entirely new forms of literature, and that's exactly what he did. In 1841, he published a story in Graham's magazine. It was about 2 women brutally unalived in their locked Paris apartment, and a brilliant amateur named C. Auguste Dupin who solves the mystery through pure logic and observation. The story was called The Murders in the Rue Morgue, and it essentially invented detective fiction, the locked room mystery, the brilliant, eccentric detective, the sidekick narrator who can't keep up, the idea that evidence and logic could solve seemingly impossible crimes. Every Sherlock Holmes story, every Hercule Poirot mystery, every crime procedural you've ever watched, they all trace back to Poe, to this one Capricorn sitting in poverty, methodically constructing puzzles that no one had ever seen before. Here's the wildest part. The word detective didn't even exist yet when Poe wrote it. He called them tales of ratiocination, stories about reasoning things out. He literally created a genre before the vocabulary for it even existed. That's Saturn energy at its most powerful. That's building the foundation that everyone else will stand on. And he didn't stop there. He wrote 2 more Dupin stories. The Mystery of Marie Roget in 1842. The Purloined Letter in 1844. Each one refined the formula. Arthur Conan Doyle would later admit that Sherlock Holmes was directly inspired by Dupin. Doyle even has Watson compare Holmes to Dupin in the very first Sherlock Holmes story. The creator of the most famous detective in history basically said, yeah, Poe did it first. That's the evolved Capricorn energy, building something that lasts forever, creating structure where there was none. He didn't just write a good mystery, he invented the entire genre. And then he moved on to horror. But while his career was rising, his personal life was following a pattern that his Pisces Moon had been writing since birth. Remember Virginia Clem, his young cousin? In May of 1836, Edgar married her. She was 13, he was 27. I know. It was a different time, and first cousin marriages weren't unusual then, but even by those standards, her age was young. What's interesting astrologically is how this relationship fit Poe's chart perfectly. The Pisces Moon craves a deep emotional bond. It wants to merge completely with another person. And Virginia, raised in the same household, already felt like family, like the intimacy was built in. He didn't call her his wife. He called her Sissy. The boundaries between romantic love and familial love were blurred from the start. Everyone who knew them described the relationship as devoted. Virginia adored Edgar. He tutored her himself, teaching her the classics and mathematics. They were rarely apart, and for a few years it seemed like Poe had finally found stability. But remember what I said about the Pisces Moon and escapism, and the Capricorn wound around loss? They were about to collide in the worst possible way. In January of 1842, Virginia was singing when she suddenly started coughing up blood. She was 19 years old. Poe initially convinced himself it was a broken blood vessel, something fixable. But the truth was devastating. Virginia had tuberculosis, the same disease that had taken his mother when he was 2 years old. This is where I need you to understand how Poe's chart was playing out. His mother died of tuberculosis. His foster mother, Frances Allen, also died of a wasting illness. His brother Henry died of complications from alcoholism and illness. And now Virginia, the one person he had built his entire emotional world around, was slowly dying of the same disease that had made him an orphan. For 5 years, Edgar watched Virginia deteriorate. They moved constantly, trying to find a climate that would help her. A cottage in the Bronx became their final home. By the fall of 1846, Virginia was bedridden, her pulse was unstable. She had night sweats, fevers, chest pain. She was wasting away while Poe sat beside her, unable to do anything but witness it. The day before she died, Poe wrote to a friend, "My poor Virginia still lives, although failing fast, and now suffering much pain." Virginia Clem Poe died on January 30th, 1847. She was 24 years old. The only portrait ever made of her was painted hours after her death because Edgar realized he didn't have a single image of her from when she was alive. This is the Capricorn curse, playing out in its most brutal form. Saturn rules time, and Capricorn knows on some fundamental level that time takes everything, but knowing it doesn't make it hurt less. A friend of Poe's later recalled finding him at Virginia's tomb on winter nights, sitting in the snow, frozen and weeping. And here's the pattern his chart predicted from the start. Every woman he loved died of the same disease: his mother, his foster mother, his wife. The Pisces moon's deepest fear is loss, and Poe lived it over and over, the same nightmare repeating until it broke him. Now, let's talk about what his chart was doing during the years between his wife's illness and his death, because this is where we see both Poe's highest achievements and his most devastating unraveling happening simultaneously. This is peak Capricorn Pisces energy. Building legacy while drowning in grief. While Virginia was sick, Poe wrote some of his most famous works: The Telltale Heart in 1843, The Black Cat the same year, The Mask of the Red Death, The Fall of the House of Usher. Every single one deals with death, madness, guilt, or premature burial. He wasn't just writing fiction, he was processing his reality through his art. That's the Pisces moon channeling pure nightmare onto the page. Think about The Telltale Heart for a second, a narrator who insists he's not insane while describing in perfect detail how he unalived an old man because of his eye. The guilt manifests as a beating heart under the floorboards that only he can hear. That's Poe's inner world externalized. The guilt, the inability to escape his own mind. The Pisces moon's tendency to be overwhelmed by emotion until it manifests physically. Or The Fall of the House of Usher, a crumbling mansion that mirrors the crumbling sanity of its inhabitants. A sister buried alive who claws her way out of her tomb. A family that destroys itself because it cannot escape its own decay. Poe was writing about watching his family die while living in houses that were falling apart. The metaphor was barely a metaphor. What's fascinating is how controlled the writing is. That's the Capricorn. The sentences are perfectly crafted. The structure is deliberate. Even his madness was organized. He wrote an entire essay called The Philosophy of Composition, explaining exactly how he constructed the Raven, breaking down the rhyme scheme, the meter, the choice of nevermore as the repeated word. He approached horror like architecture, building it brick by brick with absolute precision. And then, in January of 1845, something incredible happened. Poe published a poem in the New York Evening Mirror. It was about a grieving man visited by a raven that speaks a single word: nevermore. The poem made him a household name almost overnight. The Raven was reprinted everywhere, parodied, performed, discussed. People started calling him the Raven as a nickname. At 36 years old, Edgar Allan Poe was finally famous. But here's the Capricorn curse again: fame without fortune. Poe reportedly earned about $9 for The Raven. That's approximately $300 in today's money, for the poem that made him immortal. He later wrote, "I have made no money. I am as poor now as ever I was in my life, except in hope, which is by no means bankable." The man who invented detective fiction, who pioneered psychological horror, who wrote one of the most famous poems in the English language. And he was living in poverty, watching his wife die while the entire country recited his words. This is Saturn's lesson for Capricorn. Legacy often comes at personal cost. Poe built monuments that would outlast him, but he never got to enjoy the stability those monuments should have provided. After Virginia died, something in Poe broke. The Pisces moon's coping mechanism had always been escapism, and now, without Virginia, he had nothing to anchor him. His drinking got worse. He had periods of what looked like insanity. He tried to court several women, desperate to fill the void Virginia left, but nothing worked. He pursued the poet Sarah Helen Whitman. They actually got engaged, but her mother interfered, and rumors about Poe's drinking destroyed the relationship. He courted Frances Sargent Osgood, which created a scandal. He seemed incapable of stable attachment without Virginia. The Pisces moon needs that deep emotional bond, and without it, he was unmoored, floating, drowning in his own grief. He also became increasingly combative professionally. He accused Henry Wadsworth Longfellow of plagiarism. Multiple times he picked fights with other editors and writers. That Capricorn ambition, the need to be recognized as the best, combined with the emotional instability of unchecked Pisces energy. It was self-destructive. He was burning bridges while standing on them. In the summer of 1849, Poe returned to Richmond. He reconnected with Sarah Elmira Royster, a childhood sweetheart he'd been engaged to before John Allen interfered decades earlier. They made plans to marry. For a brief moment, it seemed like maybe things would be okay. On September 27, 1849, Poe left Richmond headed for New York City. He stopped in Baltimore. And then, we don't know what happened. For 5 days, there's no record of where he was or what he did. On October 3rd, he was found outside Gunner's Hall Tavern, wearing clothes that weren't his, delirious, unable to explain how he got there. A printer named Joseph Walker found him and sent for help. Poe was taken to Washington College Hospital and placed in a room reserved for patients ill due to intoxication. But here's the thing. The doctors noted he was having hallucinations, seeing spectral visions on the walls. His face was pale and drenched in sweat. He lapsed in and out of consciousness for 4 days. And on October 7th, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe died. The official cause listed was phrenitis, inflammation of the brain. But that was just a catch-all term for we don't know what happened. Theories about his death include alcohol poisoning, rabies, cooping, a form of voter fraud where people were drugged and forced to vote multiple times and more. But here's what his chart says. A man whose entire life was defined by death finally met his own in circumstances as mysterious and gothic as anything he ever wrote. The Capricorn who documented mortality became its final subject. And now for the Capricorn magic. See, here's what Saturn promises. The work outlasts the worker. The legacy survives the life. Edgar Allan Poe died at 40, in poverty, in obscurity, wearing someone else's clothes. But within decades, his work had reshaped literature worldwide. He invented detective fiction. Every mystery novel on your shelf owes him something. He pioneered psychological horror, proving that the scariest thing isn't the monster. It's the mind. He's credited with contributing to the emergence of science fiction. He wrote some of the most important literary criticism of his era. The man did everything. He influenced everyone from Arthur Conan Doyle to Stephen King to the creators of Criminal Minds. The Mystery Writers of America literally give out annual awards called the Edgars in his honor. The Baltimore Ravens NFL team, named after his poem. That's how embedded he is in American culture. And the Raven, it's been translated into almost every language on Earth. It's taught in schools. It's embedded in our culture so deeply that most people know the word nevermore, even if they've never read the poem. Stéphane Mallarmé translated it into French. Charles Baudelaire became obsessed with Poe and translated almost all his work. The French were actually the first to recognize Poe as a literary genius. America was too busy calling him a drunk to see what they had. His Capricorn Sun made him intimate with darkness. His Pisces Moon made him its poet. Together, they made him unforgettable. But here's the thing that really gets me. Poe wrote constantly about premature burial, about people being trapped alive in coffins and vaults, in houses that collapse on them, and for years after his death, his grave was just a small, unmarked plot. His remains were eventually moved and given a proper monument in 1875, but only after fans raised the money. For 26 years, the man who feared being buried alive and forgotten was essentially exactly that. That's the cosmic irony of his chart. He spent his whole life worrying about being forgotten, about dying before his work was finished, about legacy, and then death made his legacy immortal in a way he never got to see. So, would you want Poe's chart? The genius that can channel the unconscious into art that lasts centuries? The Capricorn ambition that builds monuments? But also the Saturn curse of loss? The Pisces Moon that feels too much and escapes through whatever numbs the pain? The pattern of watching everyone you love die the same way your mother did. Every chart has its shadow and its gift. Poe's gift was documenting darkness so beautifully that we still read it almost 200 years later. His shadow was living it. The Capricorn knew his time was limited. The Pisces Moon felt every loss like drowning. Together they created stories that will exist long after we're all gone. And that's what happens when the stars write a horror story and hand someone a pen.